The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Filled with the Holy Spirit, Jesus returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the desert for 40 days to be tempted by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and when they were over, he was hungry. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command this stone to become bread." Jesus answered him, "It is written, 'One does not live on bread alone.'" Then he took him up and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a single instant. The devil said to him, "I shall give to you all this power and glory, for it has been handed over to me, and I may give it to whomever I wish. All this will be yours if you worship me." Jesus said to him in reply, "It is written, 'You shall worship the Lord your God, and him alone shall you serve.'" Then he led him into Jerusalem, made him stand on the parapet of the temple, and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here, for it is written, 'He will command his angels concerning you to guard you, and with their hands they will support you, lest you dash your foot against a stone.'" Jesus said to him in reply, "It also says, 'You shall not put the Lord your God to the test.'" When the devil had finished every temptation, he departed from him for a time. The Gospel of the Lord. Well, happy Lent to everybody. I'm allowed to say that. You're supposed to have a happy Lent, okay? Doesn't mean have an easy Lent, just means make it happy. So the beginning words of the Gospel are kind of curious when you think about it. So Jesus has just been baptized in the River Jordan before this Gospel passage, and the skies opened and you hear the Father's voice saying, "This is my beloved Son," and the Holy Spirit descends upon him. So it's a really triumphal, glorious moment. And this Gospel then says, "Filled with the Holy Spirit." So Jesus, imagine this, he's just in the baptism, the Holy Spirit's descend on him. Filled with the Spirit, Jesus returned from the Jordan in triumph in order to be led into the desert for 40 days to be tempted. It's like, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on? How did that happen? It's like, if this is what your celebrations are like, God, imagine what the other part is like. Okay, so what is going on here? This morning I made the analogy. I said it's kind of like in Captain America when, he goes into the machine all scrawny and he comes out, and within 30 seconds there's already somebody shooting a gun, and then he has to go out and he does his first spectacular thing. Okay, kind of the same thing is happening here. So what's happening is, when Jesus, from the moment of his baptism onward, there's something cool in the life of Jesus. He is reliving, and in a certain sense, getting right all the important moments that happened in all of Jewish history, from Adam and Eve all the way up until himself. So in the baptism, Jesus was kind of kicking off. We knew that the prophets had said, there's going to come a Messiah, and he's going to bring about a new covenant, a new deal of grace. And no longer are you guys going to be able to break it, because he's going to be faithful. It's going to be written on human hearts, no longer on tablets of stone. The Spirit is going to dwell in us, and it's going to be, this great time. And when he comes out of the River Jordan and he's baptized and the Holy Spirit descends upon him, what he's doing is essentially kicking off, he's letting it be known, this new time that you've been waiting for all this time has come. From that moment onward, he starts to redo Jewish history and get it right. And he begins by entering into the desert. You remember when the Jewish people were slaves in Egypt? How did they get out? They crossed the Red Sea. They went through water. They came out the other side. And what did they do? They went into the desert. For how long? 40 years. Jesus was baptized, he came through the water, came out the other side, and God says, "To the desert with you." And when the Jewish people were sent to the desert, first of all, God sent them there so he could enter into a covenant with them, but the original plan was, okay, in short order, you're going to go and take over the Holy Land. And they went and they saw Jericho, and they said, these guys are too strong. And they had already been unfaithful to God numerous times in the desert. Finally, God says, you know what? You have been unfaithful long enough. So he says, I'm going to stick you in the desert for 40 years. Why? It's not just because God was in a bad mood and says, oh, you want to mess with me? You want a piece of me? No. What God is doing is he says, every single person who is unfaithful will die in the desert. And a new generation of people is going to rise up. And these people are going to, the only thing they will have known is to follow me. When you're in the desert, you have absolutely no security. Imagine the people of Israel. I don't remember how many they were. It was like a couple 100,000 of them. There's no food for a couple 100,000 people in the desert. Maybe 1 or 2 people might be able to scrape out a living. Hundreds of thousands? No way. And there's certainly not water. That's kind of what deserts are all about, right? And God sustains them for 40 years. And these people grow up knowing that God is the one who is going to sustain us. And they grow up, and they still have messed up plenty of times, but more or less they grow up with this mentality, we will do God's will because we know He will be faithful. Jesus goes into the desert and makes up again for all the times that the Jewish people weren't faithful. 40 days He goes out there, He's praying and fasting, offering up penance, purifying, becoming purified. Even though He's God and even though He's sinless, His human nature needed to be disciplined in order to be able to do what? In order to be able to unconditionally do God's will. At the end of the 40 days, the devil shows up and he starts tempting Jesus. And with 3 different temptations, that they all kind of seem a little bit random. The first one makes total sense. Hey, you haven't eaten for 40 days. Why don't you do something about it? If you're the Son of God, logical. You're the Son of God, turn this into bread. You can do it. And he could. He absolutely could have. What was behind the temptation? He's saying, if you're the Son of God and you are all-powerful, use your power not to do the Father's will. Use your power to do your own will. You will decide. That goes back to the Garden of Eden. That was the original temptation to Adam and Eve. Don't eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which was basically, you will decide what is good and evil. The original temptation is right there. And Jesus says, not by bread alone. And then Satan does something which seems totally random. He says, worship me. It's like, come on, am I going to worship the devil? But he says, it's not so random. If you worship me, I will give you all the power and all the money that you will ever need. You can establish a kingdom the easy way, with power and wealth. People will follow you. And again, what Jesus says is, you will worship the Lord alone. The temptation was, do it the easy way. Do it the logical way. Do it the way that makes sense. And Jesus says, no. The only thing I am here to do is to do the will of the Father, even if it doesn't seem to make sense. And then the final temptation, which again doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Hey, if you're the Son of God, why don't you throw yourself off the temple? Because the angels will catch you. And what's he doing? He's saying, if you put on a nice show, if you go to the most populated place in the entire country of Israel, where everybody's going to see you, throw yourself off, and they will be forced to acknowledge, wow, this guy, the angels carried him all the way down. He's got to be important. We have to listen to him. If you want to be followed by the people of Israel, make it evident. And again he says, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. But all 3 of these temptations come down to one thing. Use your power for yourself. Burger King, do it your way. Have it your way, okay? And he says, no. The Father owns McDonald's. We don't have it our way. You and I are entering into Lent. We have 40 days to pray and fast and do almsgiving. Those are the three things that the church proposes: prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. What is the purpose of those? It is to stretch our hearts, to do something that costs us a little bit, so that we will be willing, when we start sacrificing for the person that we love, we get fortified so that we will be free to do His will. If at the end of this Lent, by prayer, by fasting and almsgiving, we have done stuff that's a little bit tough out of love for God, we will be freed from all of our passions and all the things that kind of pull us down and make us selfish and weak. We will have the freedom of the children of God to be able to say, Lord, whatever you want, I will do. And when we do that, the good news is, all we're doing is we're opening up ourselves to be able to receive a whole lot of blessings. And who doesn't want that? So, if you want Easter, you got to go through Lent. If you want the blessings, then we have to be willing to do what it takes to accept them. Not the way that we want, but to accept them on God's terms. You don't get to have it your way. Life is not Burger King. The Father and Son and Holy Spirit,